Tom Wesley is with us. He is running for Congress. You can find out more at tomwesley.com. You can call in this morning as well at 508-438-0965 if you have any questions for Tom Wesley, candidate for Congress, Republican, and he is running against incumbent Richard Neal. Let's talk about some of the issues then, Tom, and the first one being, what do you think is the top issue of the campaign?
Well, I think people have talked an awful lot about health care and health care reform, and certainly that has to remain on the agenda. You know, for those of you who cook out there, I like to cook. I don't want to boil this soup away, but I do want to keep it simmering, because I think if we look at the process of what happened during this debate, we see all sorts of evidence of what's wrong in Washington, and what's wrong in Washington, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans as well. It's not pretty in Washington. Look, I love this country. I think Washington is broken, and I think Washington is spending far too much money. We're writing checks we can't cash. So I think keeping the health care debate and on the burner is important. I don't believe that we can repeal it anytime soon. We're going to have to work on reforming pieces of it as we begin to realize just what's in this bill. And that's something that we can do from now and until the next Congress as well.
Do you think it's a big, because you just kind of touched on this, I mean, do you think it's too partisan? Is that why we can't get things done? Was there some sort of a compromise, do you think, in the health care bill? Or was this, you know, one of those instances where this was a partisan issue? If you were a Democrat, you believed in the health care reform bill that has been passed. If you were a Republican, there's no way that you could support it. Going back to something that we were talking about earlier, you know, sort of the big government versus smaller government argument. Yeah,
well, I think there was room for compromise here that wasn't fully explored. And if you take a look at the system we have here in Massachusetts as a possible example of what we might roll out on a broader base, even Democrats in the Massachusetts Senate would tell you that a nationwide program probably isn't in our best interest, and that Massachusetts residents will lose out on this. Look, I believe in having local control, and I define that either at the state level, as we do, or if it makes sense to roll this out across state lines, to have a broader group of people participate. When I've talked to people, most people are more concerned about portability of coverage, catastrophic illnesses being covered, and pre-existing conditions being covered. And all those things are doable, they're workable, but to have that solution multiplied by a factor of 50 and to lose control over that to the national level, I think concerned people a lot, and certainly concerned me. Look, you know, if you want to change something in Beacon Hill, at least you know who to talk to. We may or may not be very effective in doing that within the Commonwealth here, but at least you know who to call. It's within our power to control that, but at the national level, it becomes a big political football.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Tom, you know, as we get calls here, I mean, we do kind of tend to go and talk radio with what is the topic of the day. And boy, we got a lot of mileage out of healthcare reform, and we got a lot of mileage out of the process that a lot of people were very upset about. But in the end, I mean, I think, you know, to boil it all away, it really does come down to the employment and the jobs, and, you know, and how are you going to put people back to work? And a lot of people who had very good jobs here in Massachusetts, in the Springfield area, or in Leicester, or other parts of the district, Douglas, that you're going to be representing, and jobs that they had that were maybe factory jobs, jobs that, you know, that you're 55 years old, and you say all of a sudden, you know what, I just don't think that job is coming back, and now you want to retrain me? I'm 55 years old. I spent 30 years doing this job.
Well, part of the key to this, I mean, one of my platforms here is the economy, and I just say jobs, jobs, jobs. And the important thing to recognize is that what forces those types of jobs that you're talking about to go offshore is government tax policy more than anything else. I mean, I think most businesses are relatively conservative. They don't want to have long, extended supply chains and distribution channels. But we push jobs offshore because we tax the overhead portion. We create a large degree of overhead for companies that the only relief they can find, either from regulation or from taxation, is to go offshore. You know, look, we talk about losing jobs to Asia all the time, but we actually lose a lot of jobs to Ireland. There's 450 U.S. companies that have marvelous factories, high-paying, high-quality jobs that used to be U.S. jobs in Ireland because their tax rate is at 10% to 12% or effectively even lower than that. labor in Ireland is between 2/3 and 3/4 of what it is here. So it's not because we have people earning $2 an hour. Yeah, there's some of that goes on over in Asia, but we lose jobs to Ireland for the very same reason. Our tax policy is driving companies offshore. We've got to change that.
Speaking with Tom Wesley, he is a candidate for Congress. www.tomwesley.com to learn more. And we're talking about some of the positions that Tom holds as he's running this race against the incumbent Richard Neal. Let's move to some of the foreign policy as well. As I said, here in Talk Radio, we like to talk about whatever the hot topic is. Yesterday, it was the president and his thoughts on our nuclear policy that he's been working on with members of the Pentagon, where you said that you served over the last year. A lot of people up in arms, feeling that, hey, wait a minute, if somebody launches some type of an attack against us, we'd like them to be a little nervous that maybe there is some sort of a nuclear deterrent on the part of the United States. As you heard what the president was saying yesterday, what were your thoughts?
Well, I think you summed that up quite well. In fact, when I worked in the Pentagon, I used to work on some nuclear policy, and it's difficult for me to imagine that we would actually go out, sort of metaphorically with arrows in our quiver to go hunting, and then leave those arrows behind at home before we go to catch the game. Look, we can't anticipate the types of attacks, the types of threats entirely that will befall the United States, and to be able to take out the most significant of our responses seems to me to be telegraphing our moves to our potential adversaries, and there are many adversaries out there.
Yeah, let's talk about one, because if you are elected, I think that it is probably the one that you will have to be spending some time on almost immediately, and that is Iran. Granted, we're in Afghanistan, granted, we're in Iraq, but it seems as if Iran and their nuclear capabilities are something that the United States is going to have to deal with at some point. Yeah,
and I think we're fumbling the ball right now as far as that's concerned, because we're injuring our relationship with Israel, who probably is more motivated to act on Iran than we are, and probably is in a better position to act on Iran than we can. The other part of this is what are we going to do? We have forces committed, and have had forces committed for 7 years in Iraq and 9 years in Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of troops deployed with really no end in sight, no end game strategy in sight. We are really hamstrung in our ability to even think about deploying forces in support of an activity that might require military action. We're really kind of down to sanctions of sorts that our European allies don't particularly want to participate in.
Yeah, we're speaking with Tom Wesley. He is running for the 2nd Congressional District. Right now the incumbent is Richard Neal. As Tom pointed out, you're the first challenger that he has faced in 12 years. That is a long time to go without a challenger. Part of the stranglehold perhaps the Democrats had here in Massachusetts. Do you find, Tom, that some people just as, because you kind of alluded to this in the beginning, that they want somebody to run? I mean, they want to have that choice, as you said that you did, on the ballot. It may be that they end up voting for Richard Neal, but they at least want it to be a race.
Yeah, can you imagine I'm the candidate of hope and change now? I really hadn't thought about that till just this moment. I think people have had it with the status quo in Washington. Here's what I think 2010 is going to represent for this country. There's going to be a sea change in Washington, and I don't know how many people are going to go down there that are new, 30, 40, 50, 60, more people. And they're going to come from both sides of the aisle. They're going to be people who say, we're going to look back in 2010, 30 years from now, and say, that was the year that America decided to take back control of America. And that this pendulum has swung so far to the left that we're going to grab hold of it and figuratively hold on to it and drag our heels to slow it down and bring it back more towards the center. And we'll look at 2010 as the year we did that. And what I look to do, to be one of 435 is not a very high fraction. But when you say, I'm going to bring leadership to that group of 50 or 60 or 70 new people that are going to Washington, who are going there with fiscally conservative credentials, to say, we're going to be a powerful voting bloc. And these are the sorts of things that we're going to do to change America, to change this course of America, to bring it back to where we're far more comfortable and we're far more confident. That's where I think the sweet spot is, to bring leadership to that group of people. And I'll work with people on both sides of the aisle. We have to. We absolutely have to. We can't be mired in partisan politics. That's happened to us now for better than 10 years, and it hasn't gotten us very far. We haven't advanced the ball.
Tom Wesley running for U.S. Congress. Thank you for spending time with us this morning.
It's been my pleasure, Hank.
Appreciate it right here on True Talk 830 WCRN. We'll certainly have you back again soon.